I'm covering discipleship, redefined, Jesus beyond church tradition. So one thing that you'll learn about me is that I'm very particular about what Jesus taught versus what we learn in modern Christianity today. So I'm hoping to help put some light on some things that some people still struggle with, and specifically those that are not followers or are new to following or have been in the church. Just listen and just kind of take a look at some of these things, and just if you have any challenges to this, please just reach out, let me know. So excuse me, I got a little cough thing too, so if I'm coughing in your ears, do apologize for that. But in today's church today, discipleship has basically been domesticated. So discipleship, for those of you that don't know, it's actively following Jesus, adopting his worldview, putting that into practice through our life choices and through modern experiences and practical usage. So a disciple was a student or a follower that actually literally and emotionally, spiritually, socially follow Jesus, right? So they attached themselves to him, and then they followed his footsteps and saw where he taught and lived what he did and ate what he ate and drank what he drank and helped support his ministry, but also be a part of that. But in today's church, the church world, the whole world idea about church per se is a big area undertone for Christians to go and make disciples, go and make fellow believers of Jesus. And that's what we're calling discipleship here. But when churches often define it, it usually means like through programs or classes or attendance processes or like volunteering or what that volunteerism process looks like. But when you actually open up the Gospels, the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John's of the world in the Bible that cover Jesus' life and what he actually calls us to do specifically, not what other men say that we should be doing through that, he actually defines this in a way that is far more radical. It's basically a death to self, carrying our cross, which we've all heard these things, and obedience to him. But these mean a lot of different things, right? So, and here's the real danger to this is that many of us think we know Jesus. A lot of us that are claimed Christians think that we know this Jesus, or some of us that have fallen away from the faith because we were raised in it and we woke up. We think we have this idea, but in reality, all of us, unless we get into the Gospels and understand who he is personally, we really only know a version of him, basically passed down to us from people that we know, or people that we have seen, or people that have told us certain things. Um, but that gets kind of handed down through culture and tradition. So the challenge before us is this: is what if Jesus, uh, like the Jesus that you think you know, isn't the Jesus of Scripture? So just kind of pin that one for a second. And what if real discipleship requires unlearning tradition, church tradition, laying down your own like reasoning and pride, and following him personally? I would just ask you guys to look at that and really challenge yourselves in these areas. Because if we do that, um, we think we get this idea about who Jesus is, and then we kind of build a life around avoiding him or practicing things that we've learned from others. But real discipleship does not come from a demand of American fed church tradition, right? If we really demands that we unlearn certain things, I think that's what we should be doing. If really following Jesus, if we take that idea, he wanted us to unlearn ourselves, unpack ourselves, die to ourselves. So let's just take time to really look at that for a minute and see what other people have thought about. Because if real discipleship demands that we unlearn this American fed church tradition, really this version of Jesus that we got from our American way of life, so many things contradict what they actually did and what the purpose was for the Jews at the time. Um, but if we lay down our own reasoning, pride, and what we preferentially prefer in our lives and how we experience that, and just simplify and organically learn who Jesus is, he's going to show himself to you in a far better way than any other person could or any other church could. And then that's going to help you with a stronger foundation, the cornerstone, if you want to call it that, for what you really should be building on, and not what other people tell you should be building on. But that does take effort and processes. People have been doing that for, excuse me, thousands of years. It is not comfortable. It's not super safe, but it is real, and it's what Jesus actually demands. So when I say safe, it's not safe for your personality, but it is safe for what your purpose is, getting closure on some divine things, and really understanding what it really means to follow Jesus instead of what you think it means. Because we all do that until we actually get and see what he says himself. So the historical reality of Jesus, before we even really get theological, it's super safe to establish the facts, right? The actual truth. Historically and empirically, the evidence for Jesus is undeniable. It's wonderful, actually, by the way. This Tacitus, he was a Roman, not Jew, not Christian, Roman. Super popular Roman historian. Have a lot of neat little references from him, but he is best known. His credibility basically comes from is widely considered as one of the most reliable human historians. Believers and non-believers alike refer back to this stuff. Same thing for Josephus, except he was Jewish, but he was not a Christian, but he was Jewish, and he's considered like one of the most excuse me important Jewish historians for the Second Temple period. This this CE 137 to 100 CE, and then Pliny the Younger, who's another Roman. He was also a governor at one point, but he was a Roman lawyer, basically. His letters are amongst the most, really the most important surviving records of Roman governance. So, out of the three people that we have here, indirect contact with Jesus, indirect beliefs of Jesus, counter beliefs with Jesus, actually. But yet we see these things. So, just a little fact on these guys. The historian Tacitus, he records things in his historical records that capture this Christus, right, and that he suffered the extreme penalty during this reign of Tiberius. More specific information that we can also vet out empirically. Josephus did some special things that corroborated things about James being the brother of Jesus, and also corroborated Jesus as the Christ, or as this claimed Christ. The Roman governor Pliny the Younger, excuse me, he testifies that Christians were in the habit of meeting on a daily basis, like a fixed day, and also singing hymns to Jesus as the Christ, as God. Right. So these are things that are outside of the Bible that also speak so much credibility and empirically uh, to the character and the personality of Jesus and his existence. Right. And then we have so many other archaeological finds that confirms this world that Jesus was in that's recorded in the Bible. This pilot stone in Caesarea, Caiaphas, ossuaries are things that validate Caiaphas as the guy that says he was the priest. These things that we found, right? Crucified victims' bones, and because we don't, nobody, one of the big things that contests is that crucifixion really wasn't a thing, but we have proof of that actually, that it was, and it was done in that same time frame. So historians, almost all historians, at least incredibly, Christian, Jewish, atheists they do affirm that Jesus did live, he preached, and was crucified. Almost all of them do, if we use actual evidence. And these are all um, really swell empirical ways and physical ways to prove that he was tangibly on the earth when he said he was. So we're just building a little case for credibility for who he is. Super important though. We go into scholarly contrast and we think tradition versus Jesus' actual demands. I just want to be clear, church tradition often emphasizes what is safe, right? Like attendance, membership, moral behavior, right? And basically a form of conformity. But Jesus does command and demands really to go much further, actually, not just those are good, but actually needs more, expects more from them. Not conformity to one body, but to him, basically. Um, So we look at areas like self-denial. If anyone would come after me, it says this in Luke. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and pick up his cross daily. That's the self-denial, right? Radical loyalty is if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, yet even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. So that's kind of like a ultimate, like really putting it aside. And then it's obedience if you love me or keep my commands, right? And that's in John 14. But we see these areas where he talks specifically, and then we have these other really influential scholars like E.P. Sanders, Ed Parrish. He's a he died a couple of years ago. A super influential New Testament scholar. He's respected by both secular and religious scholars. So he's not just some hard pushing Jesus man, but he was a neat little member of the British Academy. Did a lot of influential works in the late 20th century. So just really powerful stuff. But he notes that Jesus' call broke apart almost social values and really demanded allegiance to himself. And that was really, really a big deal for Jews at the time, really a big deal for us, right? Same way. Nicholas Wright, super prominent New Testament scholar, senior fellow at Wycliffe Hall, University of Oxford, like great studiaries, great colleges, right? Really powerful places that build up some of our greatest minds and most intellectual thinkers. Um, but even this man argues that Jesus' kingdom announcement was not spiritually an abstraction, but really a direct summons to reorder life under his reign. So just these people that really don't, that are outside of our thinking process, our American way of life, have also put a lot of effort into thinking critically about what this Christ is and this Jesus person and what it really means to follow him. Super important. But real discipleship isn't a class or title. It's a really a life reordering obedience, and it's costly, and it is super personal. And they affirm that it's very intelligent, modern, closer modern theologians and several others in this who speak a lot of credibility to doing this and what this looks like, and it does require some sort of radical demand, and not just some coming to church on Sunday type experience. We go into some of the data, which is really important. If you ever know anything about the Pew Research, it's a nonpartisan nonprofit group. It's known for large samples, like sample sizes and balanced methodology. So it's for public information. It's a fact tank out of Washington D.C. Um, but they do cover like demographical trends locally, U.S. based and globally. So they have a lot of credibility to behind some of the information. And so just speaking on them a little bit, just so you know, not just some random groups, but only 63% of U.S. adults identify as Christians. That was in 2021, but that kind of dipped a lot, drastically in 2020 in 2007. And I haven't pulled up the latest numbers on this. This is my last study on this. But church attendance, I'm sure it's drastically dropped. Excuse me. But church attendance has dropped below 30% in many areas. So that's just one of those big frustrating areas for discipleship is to go and make more believers. You would think if we're doing that effectively as we continue to multiply in this world, we should theoretically increase more. But we're actually going down, and I think that has a lot to do with this lesson we're talking about, what it really means to follow Jesus. The Barna Group, another really great research organization. They're out of Ventura, California, for whatever that's worth, but they are very well funded, very well credible. It's a U.S. based provider survey group, so they do focus a lot on evangelical orientation, and but their methodology is really sound, right? So how they figure these things out empirically and through analytics is risk based and very intelligent, right? So it's not, we don't let our opinions sway on this. We care about the facts. So they've been known time and time again, often cited by many Christian leadership groups, many Muslim groups as well. And it's just interesting to see their data. And then the General Society survey, younger generations are increasingly nuns or no religion, with over 40% of millennials unaffiliated. I think that's because we're missing this, like the teaching process of what it means. And instead of just, well, I was taught this way, so I was taught this way, so I was taught this way, so this is what you should be doing. Like, let's just take a break for a second. Let's just really figure out what Jesus taught, and then put that into practice in ourselves first. And then as we're doing that, we also start, multiplying that, but doing that without an expectation for growth, but with just a real clarity on the gospel. I think if we focus more on getting numbers, I think we miss the intent of the gospel. And it could seem as self-deprecating, but it's Jesus's work is like that, right? It's not like go and get as much. It's go and fill the real content, put the real content out. If it gets rejected, don't make it your personal mission to close off that gap. You're failing him. Like, okay, well, he tells us if you don't receive the good news, the gospel, then you can walk to the edge of that conversation and kick your metaphorical dust from your feet and just move on. Because it's really about getting the news out there. It's still out there, whether or not you reject it. The process is just getting it out there, right? And it's just another neat group. But the GSS is really the gold standard for social science data in the U.S. So they are used across multiple factions, multiple groups, not biased groups. So it's another great. But again, younger generations with over 40% of millennials not affiliated. That's pretty heavy, right? But for the church, overall interpretation, the problem isn't just that society is bad. It's that church discipled Christians crumble under cultural pressure, but Christ discipled Christians to endure. Period. That's what we should be focusing on instead of being defeated when somebody challenges or we don't fully understand. We just continue to grow and keep oriented.
believe by being back with Christ. But for the church that's watching, have we been producing church members or actual disciples? Just be thinking about that. I think everybody has an answer for that. So, like, what is discipleship really? We go into some theological confrontation here. False discipleship is not neutral. It's condemned. Even Jesus warns us in Matthew 7:22 that many will say to me, Lord, Lord, and I will declare to them, I will never, like I never knew you. That's one of those fearful verses. It does apply to everybody in the world, but as Christians, specifically, we're the ones that say that we know him. And he even tells us, just so you know, as a non-believer, if you're watching, we also are going to be held accountable to the things that we say we do. It's not just once we're saved, we're always saved. Like he clearly tells us, Lord, Lord, and I will declare to you, to them, to the person that's coming to them. We did all these things in your name. We cast out demons in your name. We did these great things in your name. We ate broke bread and prayed in your name. But he will tell us that I never knew you, right? So that's something that applies to all of us. We all have to be, prepared for that, be prepped for that. And even at further extending in James 1:22, be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. So real discipleship should transform everything, not just on the outside. So if you're a believer, you should have experienced a change on the inside of renewing of yourself, renewing of something that Christ put in there. As a non-believer, if you're a non-believer, um, you should seek out somebody that is now claimed Christian. They should experience a change in their life, right? That should be obvious if we're really walking, we're really dying to ourselves, right? Because real discipleship does change everything. Paul affirms that in Romans 12:1, where it says, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. And then again, in Philippians 3:8, I count everything as lost because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord. Right. So these are like character traits that change us. Dale Allison Jr., another New Testament scholar, he emphasizes Jesus's call was not to admire him, just like Jesus. It was to follow him at the cost of one's life. But this is what he expected. We see these men do this in the Bible. Not just a fad, but like a real way, a real change, real radical career shift, a real change to bad habits and bad expressions and bad ways to express oneself, a real challenge over, am I really doing this right? Am I really living this life right? Am I really doing, at least maybe not right, but am I living this in accordance with some greater divine or moral purpose? And if not, everybody has the chance to make that decision. But just as a believer, we do believe that we are changing. We do believe that we accept Christ, and when we do that, we have a new experience of life. It just is, and it's always better. It just doesn't first seem like that because of the changes that we have to make. So your challenge to you is: do you admire Jesus, or do you actually follow him? Like, do you just like him and the idea of him, and that he's convenient, or do you actually follow him? Do you know what he said on the Sermon on the Mount? Do you know how to apply that to your life? Do you know how to show what it means to be blessed for those that are poor in spirit? Like, do you know what those things really mean? And or at least are you trying to? I guess that's should be the change. And then we go to this logical reckoning. Most people know C.S. Lewis, a famous author, but just fun little information about him. He's no longer alive. He's in the 60s, but he's a British writer. He's an incredible theologian. He's a literary scholar. He wrote many great books. Most people have a book or a phrase from him somewhere, and if you don't, you got Chronicles of Narnia. You at least have seen it. So I mean, he's obviously he's popular amongst some social circles. But he was also a professor at Oxford and Cambridge, both very intelligent, very ideological schools, right? Very ideological, like professional college experiences. And he wasn't a biblical historian for sure. But he did carry a lot of cultural and apologetic influence that really kind of rivals a lot of most belief systems and most scholars. To be honest, he just was gifted that way. But he said these things. His famous line, his like trilemma, his like major dilemma, right? And it's in three parts. Jesus is either a liar, a lunatic, or Lord, right? He says that in his book, his 1950s book, Mere Christianity. But he's either a liar, a lunatic, or Lord, right? He knowingly deceived us. He was delusional, or he is who he claims to be, Jesus, the Son of God, right? The evidence excludes myth because we have proof that he existed. We have people that wrote about him outside of the Bible. We have locations where he said he was. We have people that were on the counter to him that also credited him. We have the Jewish writers that also credited him his existence. So we have so many things that speak to him existing. So that really shouldn't, that can't be proven. There's just too many things that prove his credibility and his existence. So we can't negate that he's a myth. That we have to exclude that. But the immediate worship of Jesus by his disciples excludes legend. So we don't like knowing that the people that immediately did worship him. We see that in Nicholas Wright's, some of his studies and some things that he also covered up. Again, he was a former bishop of England, non-American, University of Oxford. Very intelligent. We do have this immediate worship of Jesus and by his disciples. This kind of past is captured by the historians, that the Pliny the Lesser, right? So like we have this guy that has no credibility to Christianity. If anything, he actually was one of the known governors that also endorsed persecuting the Christians, but he also captured that they were doing this, way past Christ's death. So it's not just legend, right? And in the resurrection, though debated, it does remain the most historically compelling explanation. To refuse is not really intellectual honesty. It's rebellion against clear evidence and truth. Just prove me wrong on that, please. I would love to be proved wrong on that. I don't think it can be done, but because I think we're basically, it'd be folly going against the dozens of points of empirical proof. So, but it doesn't. That's not what the point is. Is that we have all this now to bolster our beliefs, our trust that he did exist. So, at a personal level, and this is we're wrapping up here. If the historical, scholarly, and theological case of Jesus is overwhelming, which it can be in some cases, then the only barrier left is you. So, if you don't have to like really wrestle with that he lived historically, he was real. The scholars have been recording and capturing information about him, like the Augustines and all the other dozens of great like reformers over the 1500s, 1600s, all the great creeds that came from the early 300s. This, all these other pieces, historically, scholarly, and then theologically, there's nothing that really clashes with how him, nothing that really other usurps him being divine. Nothing else really challenges that, and even no other religion claims to be God in human form or to do these things for us. Then the only thing that's really left is you on whether or not you want to believe these things or not. So it's up to you. Like, will you continue living in this church defined discipleship or this process for what it looks like to be a Christian because of a church explanation, because it might keep you safe or feel good or lukewarm, or are you interested in embracing this Jesus defined discipleship process that does demand death to self and total surrender? But it does require you to be a part of that, right? So, and even Jesus says this in Matthew 10, whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will find it for my sake, right? So it's just, you think you have life now, but there's gaps, there's voids, there's questions, right? And
I would just ask you to consider, you know, stop shaping Jesus around your preferences, what you think he is because of this church that was messed up, or your mom whooped you and made you do Hail Marys or something. Like this isn't that same Jesus, right? So while it was a good try to help get that locked in there, it's still preferences, right? So, but you can learn who he is through yourself and through your own pursuits. Stop making ideas about what you think Jesus is because of what you've read on Instagram or somebody scroll on or you saw some funny GIF where some pastor is yelling and they made it silly, or I don't know what else. And don't look at people for Jesus. That's really what I'm trying to say is don't look to people for Jesus or for a real explanation of who he is for you and who he really is, period. Because we're human, we make mistakes. But I will tell you this, I would encourage you to stop consuming church, the process of church. Wonderful. Once we can get into Christ, and giving to a church, being a part of church is very special. It's actually a necessity for the Holy Spirit. That's why he came, right? But to get into that state first, like we miss so many steps on understanding and knowing Christ first. So stop consuming this church and start worshiping Jesus as the Christ, or just Jesus as this God King that came in Nazarene. As an incarnation, God became flesh, and we know that in John 1:14. This atonement process, right? He died for our sins. He was reconciled, and he reconciled humanity for us to God. And Paul does that in Romans 5:8. Resurrection did happen. He defeated death on behalf of all mankind, right? We see that
Paul talks about that a little more in depth in 1 Corinthians 15. He is Lord over everything, all creation. Every knee will shall bow. We see that in Philippians. We see that even farther in Revelation 2:10, Philippians 2:10, and then ongoing presence, right? The Spirit abides with us. That's in John 14:16 through 17, where Jesus even tells us, because we can prove that He's real, and then we can prove that the ministry happened. Then what He said, logically, we can choose not to just believe that. Or He has no reason to do what He did or be proven that He existed without actually doing something. And then you don't just get radical changes or some radical religion that started from 1272, 500 people and then made it across the world into your ear holes, and wherever you're sitting. It just doesn't happen without some sort of like divine power 2,000 years later, too. I just want to encourage you that at the end of Proverbs 3, 5 through 6, right, it says to trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. That's so imperative, man. Like, so to get in there is to first you got to disarm your own understandings and let Him do that and be part of that and get into the gospel and figure out who Jesus is yourself and let you and Him work up a relationship. You might still reject Him at the end of that, but until you have that process, you're not going to actually be able to me, you're not going to be able to check off that you tried to let Him in personally, instead of just like every other majority feeling offended by culture pressing this idea on you. Like, that's fair. I get that. We as Christians, real followers of Christ, get that all the time by, you know, what used to start as great forms of equality now are just oppressive forms of preferential opinionated viewpoints. But we also feel that too, right? And just looking at the responses and how that should go and how Christ would respond to that, I think that you're going to see something a little different once you start getting in there. And a lot of answers. Educate yourself on what He really means and who He is by being in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's in the New Testament, the first 4 books in the New Testament. Start there. Um, I'd love to do that with you. If you ever have a chance or you're ever interested in studying more, on your side 100%, I would love to. But let me know.
The evidence is clear, history is solid. I think the theology is clear. The only question that really remains is, will you worship Him in spirit and truth, and will you follow Him as He really is? And then all my wonderful references are back here. Please, they're here. I can send you links or wherever they're at if you need them. Um, Thanks, guys, and remember, learn about who Jesus is for your sake and for everybody else around you. But for you, just you and Him. Just try Him. Just try. Just really put effort into like reading about who He is and who He is to you, not who you think He is because of what somebody else showed you or taught. And it's going to come over messy, which it probably is for you right now, unless you've gotten in there yourself. So I pray that you guys do that. Pray for every one of you that is currently in and currently is outside of that path, for that narrow path to get and see the bottom of Jesus' robe when that day comes. Um, I just hope that you guys have that and have the boldness to at least say, I don't, and try it. Bye.